You lost everything. The words echoed across family courtroom 4B like a final verdict on a life that no longer mattered. A few people looked away. A few smiled. And no one noticed the distant sound moving through the cloudy afternoon sky. Ethan Walker stood beside the defense table without saying a word. At 42 years old, he looked less like a man leaving a courtroom and more like a man leaving a storm. His navy blazer was worn at the elbows. His tie hung slightly crooked. The silver streaks at his temples seemed to have multiplied over the last year. Across the room, Vanessa Walker adjusted her designer handbag and leaned back in her chair with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed she had won. Her attorney, Brandon Pierce, closed a thick folder and offered a confident smile. "Congratulations, Vanessa," he said. "The court has ruled in your favor." She nodded slowly. "I knew the truth would come out eventually." Ethan lowered his eyes. Not in shame. Not in defeat. Just silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped against polished tile. Life moved forward for everyone in the room except the man standing alone near the exit. Judge Rebecca Collins gathered her notes and prepared to leave the bench. She glanced toward Ethan one final time. Something about him bothered her. Most people who lost everything showed anger, frustration, desperation. Ethan showed none of those things. He simply reached down and picked up a small cardboard box sitting beside his chair. That was all he was taking with him. One small box. Brandon noticed it and chuckled. "That's it?" he asked. "After 15 years of marriage?" A few quiet laughs followed. Ethan looked at him calmly. "That's enough." Brandon smirked. "Well, I hope it was worth it." Ethan didn't respond. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You could have fought harder, Ethan." For the first time, he looked directly at her. His blue eyes remained steady. "Some things are more important than winning." Vanessa shook her head. "That's exactly why you ended up here." The room grew quiet again. Ethan bent slightly and secured the lid on the box. Inside rested 3 items. An old photograph of a smiling little girl, a worn military challenge coin, and a silver wristwatch that no longer worked. To everyone else, they looked like worthless keepsakes. To Ethan, they were the last pieces of a life no court could divide. He carried the box carefully toward the exit. His footsteps echoed across the floor. Behind him, conversations resumed. Lawyers packed briefcases. Clerks organized files. The world had already moved on. At the doorway, Ethan stopped briefly. Not because he wanted to argue. Not because he regretted anything. He simply turned his head and looked back toward the empty witness stand. "One day," he said quietly, "my daughter will know the truth." No one answered. Brandon rolled his eyes. Vanessa looked away. Judge Collins paused with one hand on her robe. Then Ethan opened the door and stepped into the gray afternoon. Behind the courthouse windows, clouds drifted low across the sky. A cold wind moved through the parking lot. And somewhere far beyond the city skyline, a sound was growing louder. The courthouse doors closed behind Ethan Walker with a muted thud that seemed to erase the last 15 years of his life. The cold afternoon air greeted him with a sharp gust of wind, tugging at his jacket as he stepped onto the wide concrete stairs. Below him, reporters drifted between parked cars searching for stories that mattered. To them, Ethan did not look like one. He looked like another man who had lost everything. He tightened his grip on the cardboard box and started down the steps. One step. Then another. Slow. Steady. Unhurried. The same way he had walked through every difficult season of his life. A young courthouse employee held the door open for a family entering the building. She glanced at Ethan and offered a polite smile. He returned it. Nothing more. Nothing less. The parking lot stretched before him beneath a blanket of gray clouds. A row of American flags near the entrance fluttered against the wind. Their fabric snapped softly in the distance. Ethan reached his aging pickup truck and rested the box carefully on the hood. For a moment, he simply stood there. Silent. Thoughtful. Present. He opened the lid. The photograph sat on top. A little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile stared back at him from a summer day long gone. Lily. 10 years old now. Smart. Kind. The best part of him. Ethan traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. I kept my promise, he whispered. No matter what they think. Beneath the photograph rested the challenge coin. The metal surface had dulled over time, but the engraved eagle remained visible. Honor. Service. Sacrifice. 3 words that once shaped every decision he made. 3 words few people seemed to value anymore. He closed the box and exhaled slowly. Across the lot, 2 attorneys exited the courthouse laughing together. One pointed briefly toward Ethan. The other shook his head. Their conversation faded into the wind. Ethan paid them no attention. Real strength rarely announced itself. It endured. A vibration interrupted the silence. His cell phone. He reached into his pocket and studied the screen. No caller name appeared. Only a secure number he had not seen in years. His expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Recognition. He answered. Walker. A woman's voice came through immediately. Calm. Professional. Familiar. We have arrived. Ethan looked toward the clouds. You should not be here. With respect, the voice replied. The decision was never ours to make. He closed his eyes briefly. Who authorized this? There was a pause. Then came the answer. She did. Ethan remained silent. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Somewhere above the city, a distant rhythmic sound began to emerge. Faint at first. Almost impossible to identify. Then stronger. Then closer. Ethan opened his eyes and lifted his gaze toward the sky. Around him, people started looking up. Conversation stopped. Car doors paused halfway closed. Heads turned toward the growing sound rolling across the clouds like an approaching storm. And for the first time that day, something unexpected appeared in Ethan Walker's eyes. Concern. The sound continued to grow until it became impossible to ignore. What had begun as a faint rhythm beyond the clouds now rolled across the courthouse grounds with unmistakable force. People stopped walking. Conversations faded. Even the reporters near the entrance lowered their cameras and looked skyward. Ethan Walker remained beside his pickup truck, his hand resting on the cardboard box. His expression stayed calm, but inside, old memories were beginning to stir. The secure call had ended less than a minute ago. Yet the words still echoed in his mind. She did. There was only one person who could have given that order. Only one person with the authority, the resources, and the determination to ignore protocol completely. Ethan had hoped never to see her again. Across the parking lot, the courthouse doors opened. Vanessa stepped outside with Brandon Pierce at her side. They were still talking when the sound interrupted them. Brandon looked upward first. What in the world is that? Vanessa shielded her eyes against the gray afternoon light. Probably a news helicopter. But even as she said it, she sounded uncertain. News helicopters did not sound like this. The air itself seemed to vibrate. More people emerged from the courthouse. Clerks. Attorneys. Visitors. Judge Rebecca Collins appeared near the entrance and paused beneath the stone columns. Her gaze followed everyone else's toward the sky. Ethan glanced down at his watch before remembering it no longer worked. The broken hands remained frozen at a moment years earlier. A reminder that some events never truly left you. His phone vibrated again. Another message. This time text only. We are 3 minutes out. He stared at the screen before locking it without replying. Mr. Walker? A voice called. Ethan turned. Judge Collins was approaching from across the lot. Her black robe moved gently in the wind. She stopped several feet away. I hope you do not mind me asking, she said carefully. Is this connected to you? Ethan looked toward the clouds. I was hoping it would not be. The judge studied him. That is not exactly a denial. A faint smile touched Ethan's face for the first time all day. "No, Your Honor. It is not." Before she could ask another question, the clouds shifted. A dark shape emerged overhead. Small at first, then growing larger. The spinning rotors became visible. Gasps spread through the crowd. Several people instinctively stepped backward. Brandon Pierce stared with his mouth slightly open. Vanessa blinked repeatedly as if her eyes were struggling to process what she was seeing. The aircraft descended slowly through the overcast sky. Sleek. Black. Powerful. It did not circle. It did not hesitate. It came directly toward the courthouse parking lot with deliberate precision. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not out of fear. Out of resignation. Because he knew exactly what this meant. The past he had spent years burying had finally decided to find him. The helicopter continued its descent. Wind swept across the pavement. Loose papers scattered. Coats flapped wildly. And standing in the center of it all, holding a small cardboard box that seemed worth more than anything he had lost in court, Ethan Walker whispered a single name. Charlotte. The helicopter settled lower until every window of the courthouse reflected its dark silhouette against the clouds. Wind swept across the parking lot in powerful waves, sending leaves skittering across the pavement and forcing people to shield their faces. Conversations disappeared beneath the steady rhythm of the rotors. What had started as curiosity was quickly becoming something else. Confusion. Suspense. Unease. Ethan Walker stood perfectly still. He did not wave. He did not step forward. He simply watched. Judge Rebecca Collins remained beside him, her eyes fixed on the descending aircraft. "Mr. Walker," she said over the noise, "should we be concerned?" Ethan shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Then why do I feel like everyone here is about to learn something important?" Ethan glanced at her briefly. "Because they are." The helicopter touched down on an empty section of pavement near the far edge of the lot. Its landing skids settled smoothly onto the asphalt with remarkable precision. The rotors continued spinning overhead. Security officers rushed toward the area but slowed as soon as they noticed something unusual. The aircraft carried no visible corporate logo. No news markings. No government insignia. Just a polished black exterior that seemed almost intentionally anonymous. Brandon Pierce adjusted his tie nervously. "What exactly is this?" Vanessa crossed her arms. "Probably some wealthy friend trying to make a dramatic entrance." Yet her voice lacked confidence. Deep down, she knew Ethan had never cared about dramatic entrances. That was one of the reasons she had stopped understanding him years ago. A side door opened. Every eye in the parking lot focused on the aircraft. One person stepped out. Then another. Then a third. All three wore dark flight jackets. Their movements were calm. Disciplined. Professional. They exchanged no visible gestures. No wasted motion. The tallest of the three looked across the parking lot and immediately spotted Ethan. His posture changed at once. The other two noticed and straightened as well. Ethan sighed quietly. "Please do not do this," he murmured under his breath. But it was already too late. The three individuals walked directly toward him. The crowd parted instinctively. Reporters lowered their microphones. Attorneys stepped aside. Even the courthouse security officers hesitated. The atmosphere had shifted. Something invisible had entered the moment. Something larger than status. Larger than money. Larger than the courtroom battle that had ended less than an hour earlier. The three figures stopped several feet in front of Ethan. For a brief second, absolute silence seemed to settle over the parking lot despite the spinning rotors behind them. Then, in perfect unison, all three stood at attention. The tallest among them spoke first. "Commander Walker." Several people exchanged confused looks. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Not anymore." The man offered a faint smile. "With respect, sir, some titles do not expire." Then all three raised their right hands in a formal salute. Gasps spread through the crowd. Judge Collins stared in disbelief. Brandon's confidence evaporated completely. Vanessa took a step backward. Ethan looked at the three former officers standing before him, and realized the past had not merely found him. It had arrived with witnesses. The salute remained suspended in the cold afternoon air for several seconds that felt much longer. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the reporters who had rushed toward the scene seemed unsure whether they were witnessing a private reunion or a moment of history. Ethan Walker looked at the three former officers and slowly returned the gesture out of respect rather than authority. "At ease," he said quietly. The men lowered their hands immediately. The tallest among them smiled. "It is good to see you again, sir." Ethan shook his head. "I told all of you years ago to stop calling me that. And we ignored that instruction years ago," another replied. A few nervous laughs escaped from the crowd. Judge Rebecca Collins continued watching carefully. The pieces were beginning to shift in her mind. The calm man who had walked into her courtroom carrying a cardboard box suddenly seemed very different from the man standing before her now. Yet Ethan himself had not changed. Only everyone else's understanding of him had. Brandon Pierce stepped forward cautiously. "Excuse me," he said. "Who exactly are you people?" The tallest officer glanced at him. "Former personnel." "Former personnel of what?" The man offered a polite smile. "That is not my information to share." Brandon opened his mouth to press further but stopped when he realized no answer was coming. Across the lot, Vanessa stared at Ethan with growing confusion. 15 years of marriage suddenly felt incomplete. There were entire chapters of his life she had never known existed. Entire worlds he had never discussed. "Ethan," she called. "What is happening?" Ethan looked toward her. There was no anger in his expression. No satisfaction. No revenge. Only quiet dignity. "Nothing is happening, Vanessa. Something old is simply catching up with me." Before she could respond, movement near the helicopter drew everyone's attention. Another figure appeared in the open doorway. Unlike the others, this person did not step out immediately. She remained partially inside the aircraft, speaking briefly with someone unseen. Then she emerged. The parking lot seemed to freeze. She wore a charcoal coat that moved gently in the wind. Her posture was composed, confident, effortless. Long chestnut hair framed a face that carried both intelligence and authority. She descended the steps. Without hurry, her eyes fixed on one person and one person only. Ethan. The three officers immediately stepped aside. Judge Collins noticed the gesture at once. They were not making room for a superior officer. They were making room for someone even more important. Ethan released a slow breath. "Charlotte," he said. Charlotte Hayes stopped a few feet away. For a moment neither of them spoke. Years of history seemed to pass silently between them. Finally she smiled. Not the smile of a powerful executive addressing an employee. Not the smile of a public figure greeting an acquaintance. It was the smile of someone profoundly relieved. "You look exactly the same," she said softly. Ethan glanced at his worn jacket and laughed once. "That is objectively untrue." Her eyes warmed. "No. The important parts are exactly the same." Around them, the crowd watched in complete silence. And for the first time that afternoon, people began to realize the helicopter was not the story. Charlotte Hayes was. Charlotte Hayes stood quietly before Ethan while the wind from the helicopter rolled across the parking lot. Around them, dozens of people watched without understanding why the atmosphere had changed so completely. The rotors continued spinning overhead, yet somehow the silence between Charlotte and Ethan felt louder. Judge Rebecca Collins studied the woman carefully. The name sounded familiar. Then recognition struck. Charlotte Hayes was not merely successful. She was one of the most influential leaders in American aerospace engineering. Her company had developed technologies used across commercial aviation, emergency response systems, and advanced flight programs. Her interviews appeared on national television. Her speeches filled conference halls. Yet now she stood in a courthouse parking lot looking at Ethan Walker as if none of that mattered. "You should not have come," Ethan said gently. Charlotte smiled. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." "I mean it." "And I ignored it." A faint laugh escaped Ethan before disappearing again. One of the former officers stepped closer. "Ma'am, the schedule is already delayed." Charlotte nodded without looking away from Ethan. "Then it can wait a little longer." Brandon Pierce exchanged a confused glance with Vanessa. "Who is she?" he whispered. Vanessa shook her head. "I do not know." Yet the uncertainty in her voice continued growing. She had spent years believing she understood Ethan completely. Now every minute revealed another piece of a life she had never seen. Charlotte finally turned toward the crowd. Her expression remained calm and professional. "I apologize for the disruption," she said. "I realize this must seem unusual." No one answered. Reporters immediately raised their cameras again. Several courthouse employees exchanged excited whispers. Judge Collins stepped forward. "Miss Hayes," she said, "may I ask how you know Mr. Walker?" Charlotte looked back at Ethan. For a moment it seemed she was deciding how much to reveal. Ethan gave a subtle shake of his head. Not because he feared the truth. Because he preferred privacy. Charlotte understood immediately. She always had. "Many years ago," she said carefully, "I was given an opportunity that changed my entire future. Mr. Walker played an important role in that chapter of my life." The answer only deepened the mystery. Brandon frowned. "What kind of role?" Charlotte's eyes moved toward him. "The kind that cannot be measured by a resume or a bank account." Ethan lowered his gaze. Compliments always made him uncomfortable. The wind softened slightly as clouds drifted overhead. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled beyond the city skyline. Charlotte noticed the cardboard box resting against Ethan's truck. "You kept it," she said quietly. Ethan followed her gaze. "Some things are worth carrying. Even after all these years? Especially after all these years." Charlotte's eyes softened. She remembered another day long ago. Another difficult moment. Another version of Ethan Walker standing quietly while everyone else focused on status, titles, and appearances. Some people accumulated wealth. Some accumulated influence. Ethan accumulated trust. That was far rarer. Charlotte took a slow breath. Then she reached into her coat pocket and removed a small sealed envelope. "There is something you need to see," she said. Ethan stared at the envelope. His expression changed for the first time since leaving the courtroom. Not concern. Not curiosity. Recognition. Because he knew exactly what was inside. The envelope remained in Charlotte Hayes's hand while the wind moved gently across the courthouse parking lot. No one spoke. No one seemed willing to interrupt whatever invisible thread connected the two people standing before them. Ethan looked at the sealed envelope for several long seconds. Then he sighed quietly. "I told you I was done." Charlotte nodded. "You did. And yet here you are. Because some promises are bigger than retirement." Ethan lowered his gaze. Around them, reporters continued recording. Attorneys whispered. Courthouse employees exchanged curious looks. None of them realized they were standing in the middle of a story that had started more than a decade earlier. Charlotte extended the envelope. "Open it." Ethan hesitated. Then he accepted it. The paper felt familiar. Official. Important. He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the contents. The moment his eyes moved across the page, everything around him seemed to disappear. The helicopter. The courthouse. The crowd. Gone. Only memory remained. 12 years earlier, Ethan Walker had stood inside a massive aircraft testing facility in Nevada. The desert sun had blazed against endless miles of dry earth. Engineers moved between hangars. Pilots reviewed flight data. Advanced prototypes waited behind secured doors. Back then, Ethan had not been a man carrying a cardboard box. He had been one of the country's most respected flight commanders. calm under pressure, brilliant in the air, trusted by everyone who worked beside him. Charlotte had been there too. Younger, determined, unknown. She was an aerospace engineer with ideas no one wanted to fund and dreams most people considered impossible. Many executives dismissed her. Some laughed outright. They said she was too ambitious, too inexperienced, too idealistic. But Ethan had listened. He remembered that day clearly. Charlotte had spread blueprints across a metal table and explained her vision for safer emergency aviation systems. Most of the room had ignored her. Ethan had not. "Keep talking," he had told her. "The good ideas are usually the ones people dismiss first." That single conversation changed everything. Investors eventually listened. Projects moved forward. Opportunities followed. Years later, Charlotte built one of the most successful aerospace companies in the country. Yet she never forgot the man who had believed in her before anyone else did. The memory faded. Ethan returned to the present. He stared at the document in his hands. Judge Collins noticed the change in his expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked softly. Ethan did not answer. Charlotte stepped beside him. "3 months ago," she said, addressing the crowd, "a federal aviation initiative selected one company to lead the most important flight safety program in the country." Reporters immediately leaned closer. Brandon Pierce frowned. Vanessa listened carefully. Charlotte continued. "The program requires a director." Ethan closed his eyes. He already knew where this was going. Charlotte smiled gently. "The board unanimously selected Ethan Walker." Silence followed. Absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Vanessa stared at Ethan as though she were seeing him for the first time. Brandon's confident expression vanished completely. Judge Collins slowly looked from the document to Ethan and back again. Charlotte folded her hands. He turned the position down twice. A stunned murmur rippled through the crowd. Charlotte's smile widened slightly. "That is why I came personally." The crowd remained frozen as Charlotte's words settled over the parking lot. Ethan Walker had been offered one of the most prestigious positions in modern aviation, and he had refused it. Twice. For many people standing there, the idea made no sense. Success was supposed to be chased. Wealth was supposed to be protected. Status was supposed to be displayed. Yet Ethan had walked into court that morning looking like a man with nothing. Judge Rebecca Collins folded her arms thoughtfully. The picture was becoming clearer, but not complete. "Why would someone turn down an opportunity like that?" she asked. Charlotte glanced toward Ethan. "Because he was busy being a father." Silence followed. Several people lowered their eyes. Vanessa felt something tighten in her chest. Charlotte continued. "The board offered him a corner office, stock options, private transportation, and enough compensation to change several generations of a family's future." Brandon Pierce stared in disbelief. "And he said no?" "Immediately," Charlotte replied. "The first time he said his daughter needed stability. The second time he said she needed her father more than the industry needed another executive." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He never enjoyed being discussed like this. Charlotte noticed. "You see," she said softly, "that is exactly why they wanted him." A reporter finally found his voice. "Mr. Walker, is that true?" Ethan looked at the gathering crowd. "Most parents make sacrifices. Mine were not special." "Not special?" Charlotte asked gently. "You gave away opportunities most people would spend their entire lives pursuing." Ethan shrugged. "Lily only gets one childhood." The answer landed with more force than any grand speech could have. The wind moved quietly across the lot. Somewhere nearby, a flag snapped against its pole. Judge Collins glanced toward the cardboard box beside Ethan's truck. Suddenly it seemed more valuable than anything discussed inside the courtroom earlier that day. Vanessa looked at Ethan carefully. Memories returned. The missed promotions. The jobs he quietly declined. The nights he spent helping Lily with homework instead of attending networking events. At the time, she had called it a lack of ambition. Now she wondered if she had misunderstood everything. Charlotte stepped closer. There is something else they deserve to know. Ethan immediately shook his head. Charlotte. No. Her voice remained calm but firm. Not today. She turned toward the crowd. Many people assume Mr. Walker lost a great deal in court this morning. Murmurs spread. Charlotte nodded slightly. What none of you know is that several years ago Ethan transferred most of his major assets into protected educational and family trusts. Brandon blinked. What? Charlotte continued. Those resources were never intended for him. They were established for Lily's future. Vanessa stared at Ethan. You never told me that. Ethan met her gaze. Because it was never about me. The realization spread through the crowd like a slow wave. He had not walked away from court with nothing. He had simply chosen not to fight for things he no longer valued. Charlotte looked at the document in Ethan's hands. The board's offer still stands. Ethan stared at the paper. Then he looked toward the photograph of Lily resting inside the cardboard box. And for the first time all afternoon, he appeared uncertain. The document trembled slightly in Ethan Walker's hands, not because of the wind but because of the weight of the decision before him. The parking lot had become completely silent. Reporters had stopped asking questions. Attorneys had stopped whispering. Even the spinning rotors above seemed distant now. Everyone was watching the same man. The same man they had overlooked less than an hour earlier. Charlotte Hayes stood patiently beside him. She did not pressure him. She never had. She simply waited. Ethan looked down at the photograph inside the cardboard box. Lily's smile stared back at him from a simpler time. He remembered school recitals, weekend breakfasts, long drives with music playing softly through aging speakers. Every choice he had made over the last decade had been for her. Every sacrifice. Every opportunity declined. Every dream postponed. Judge Rebecca Collins stepped forward slightly. Mr. Walker, she said gently, whatever you decide, I hope you know something. Ethan looked up. What is that? The judge smiled. Today I watched a man leave a courtroom with more dignity than most people carry through an entire lifetime. A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Praise still made him uncomfortable. Vanessa stood several yards away, struggling to find words. The confident certainty she had carried out of the courtroom was gone. In its place was reflection. Regret. Understanding arriving too late. Ethan, she said softly. He turned toward her. I was wrong. The words barely rose above a whisper. Ethan did not respond immediately. Vanessa swallowed. Hard. For years I thought ambition looked a certain way. I thought success looked a certain way. I did not see what was right in front of me. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just grace. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. Tears filled her eyes. That was all he said. No lecture. No revenge. No reminder of what she had missed. Only kindness. Charlotte smiled quietly. It was exactly what she expected from him. Ethan looked back at the document. Then at Charlotte. One condition. Her eyes brightened. Name it. My daughter comes first. Always. Charlotte laughed softly. The board already knows that. In fact, it is one of the reasons they refuse to stop asking. For the first time all afternoon, a genuine smile appeared on Ethan's face. Small. Honest. Real. He signed the document. Applause erupted across the parking lot. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sincere. The kind of respect that cannot be purchased and cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. Charlotte accepted the signed papers. The three former officers exchanged proud smiles. Judge Collins nodded with satisfaction. Ethan picked up the cardboard box and walked toward the helicopter. Halfway there, he stopped and looked back one final time. The courthouse stood beneath the gray sky exactly as it had that morning. Yet everything had changed. Not because wealth had appeared. Not because status had been revealed. Because the truth had finally become visible. Real strength had never been hiding inside the helicopter. It had been standing quietly beside a pickup truck carrying a cardboard box. Ethan stepped aboard. The helicopter lifted slowly into the afternoon sky. And as it disappeared beyond the clouds, the people below remained silent, not because they were shocked, but because they had just witnessed something far rarer than success. They had witnessed character.